So what is poppin', everyone? You're over the title video, so let's get on into it. Now, I haven't picked up this book to read it in quite a long time, like, probably a year. So if I look lost at the beginning, that's why, because it's not even at like a chapter part. All right, we're on page 146. When her case came to court, Susan tried to implicate Jerry right from the beginning by entering a plea of guilty by reason of insanity, saying that he had poisoned her mind and brainwashed her into killing Dan so he could have the money. The jury didn't buy it, but they did buy her false testimony that Jerry knew about it and encouraged her. He got 15 years and she got her revenge. As she lay there, Susan was wishing she believed in God. She was absolutely terrified and was becoming more so by the minute. She would have loved to have had something to hang on to and pray to. She had never felt more alone and scared in her life. One more dreadful night to endure, probably sleepless, and then the unthinkable. Mercifully, in spite of everything that she was feeling, sleep was beginning to overtake her. Her eyes were becoming heavy, and her breathing was slowing and becoming more rhythmic. Suddenly, she became aware of a light emanating from somewhere above her, illuminating the cramped cell. The light got brighter and very soon became intense. Susan didn't know whether she was asleep or not, or whether she was imagining it. Even though her eyes remained closed, she did a reality check and realized that she was still lying on her bed in her cell and that tomorrow she was going to die. This was no alternate reality. It was the same reality she had been living for 10 years. But the light was something else altogether, like nothing she had ever experienced before. Even more extraordinary was that all her fear and terror had completely disappeared. All she could feel was a profound sense of peace enveloping her entire body like a down quilt. A few moments passed, and then, even though her eyes were still closed, she became aware of a form gradually taking shape within the light. It vaguely resembled a human, but the light being so bright, Susan could make out no features or edges, but what she could feel was a deep and overwhelming sense of unconditional love emanating from this being. When it spoke to her, it was as if the voice was in her head, and yet it seemed entirely real. "Hello, Susan." The voice was smooth and soft. "Who are you? What are you?" whispered Susan. "Am I just dreaming this, or are you real?" "I've come to you in your dream state, but I am real enough," replied the being. "I'm here to help you make your journey to the other side and to ease the way for you. Had I come while you were in your full waking state, fear would have prevented you from being aware of my presence. While we angels do our work unseen most of the time, in your case we wanted to become manifest. There's only one of you," Sue said. What are words? There's only one of you," said Susan. "I appear as one individual to you right now, but in truth we are a collective. In this form I am representing many souls and many angels, especially the ones who have been working with you." "Why are you here?" asked Susan. "We see the guilt and pain that you are in, and we wish to alleviate those feelings as you prepare to make your transition to the other side," the being explained. I'm low-key so confused right now. I don't know what this has to do with radical self-forgiveness. Like I said, y'all, I haven't read this book in like a year, and so I'm like, I'm just as confused as y'all. So but this is very interesting. "We see the guilt and pain that you are in, and we wish to alleviate those feelings as you prepare to make your transition to the other side," the being explained. "Do you do this with everyone?" asked Susan. "Yes, to a greater or lesser degree, but as I said, we most often do it in a way that precludes any awareness. Some people think of it as a premonition of their impending death, but for the most part, people don't even know. Then why would you make yourself known to me? What are your words? Then why have you made yourself known to me? Asked Susan. I'm not religious and have never believed in God. Even now, as I face my death, I still don't believe. It's not necessary in the least, replied the being reassuringly. Everyone is cared for just the same. We make no distinctions. Your beliefs are irrelevant. But there are others in this prison more worthy than I am to be given this chance, pleaded Susan. Many of them are not actually guilty of the crimes for which they have been convicted, but I really am guilty. I killed my husband in cold blood. I deserve to feel guilty and I deserve to die. I am not in the least bit worthy to receive your help. Apparently someone on this side disagrees with you, replied the being. Someone you know well. Who, Susan? It's me, Dan. Oh, that's so juicy. Susan was now in complete shock. She still wasn't sure whether this was all a dream or couldn't make out whether that voice, which certainly sounded like Dan's, was in her head or coming from near the being. Perhaps both. I know this must be a shock, Susan, Dan's voice continued. I insisted on it, though, so it's my fault. I couldn't bear to see you in such terrible pain. Usually this doesn't happen until after you die, but I wanted you to know. I wanted you to have the knowledge going into tomorrow, given the state you'll be in. The being spoke. Before you incarnated, Susan, I was your angel of incarnation, which means that I was the one who helped you plan your life. My name is Harley. You and I, along with your soul group, which included Dan, Jerry, your mother and father, and a number of others, planned it down to the smallest detail, and I have to say it has worked out pretty well so far. Wait a minute, interrupted Susan. What do you mean we planned it all? That's crazy. Why would I plan this horrible outcome? It's true, Susan, Dan interjected. I wouldn't have believed it either when I was on that side. As you know, I was close to anything other than scientific reality. But as soon as I passed over and got acclimated to the new vibration, I began to realize that my view of life on Earth, while it was true in terms of earthbound reality, was not the real truth. It was all an illusion. The truth lay elsewhere. I soon came to see that we, as intelligent spiritual beings, deliberately choose to incarnate into human form. Sometimes, many times over, in order to learn lessons that will help us to evolve spiritually. The idea that we are fallen and that God is mad at us is not true at all, and believe me, there is no hell. Prison is my version of hell, rejoined Susan. I can understand that, replied Dan, who after a pause continued. It wasn't long before I was reunited with those in my soul group who had remained or had incarnated and come back home before me. I was taken through my life review and saw how everything that had ever happened to me was all part of my plan for the particular incarnation that had just ended, including being murdered by me, quipped Susan, who was rightfully skeptical. Yes, including being murdered by you, replied Dan, without missing a beat. We agreed upon it in advance of our incarnation. It was all part of our soul contract. And what about Jerry? Was he in on the plot too? Susan asked. If it hadn't been for him, I wouldn't have killed you, Dan. There was no other reason to. Of course he was, interjected Harley. Jerry played a very crucial role in this whole drama. He had his own lessons to learn too, of course, just as we all do when we go down to the earth plane. He is fulfilling his soul journey by being incarcerated for 15 years. Are you saying he chose that? Demanded Susan incredulously. He chose 15 years in prison just to learn a lesson? He needed you to trigger his intense fear of loss of freedom by first involving him in the murder, and then just when he thought he had ensured his freedom by bolting from the relationship, you turned around and betrayed him. That enabled him to do the prison time he needed to do. Now let's get this straight, said Susan. Are you also saying that I actually chose to murder my husband, live in this rat hole for 10 years or more, and end up being executed as a murderer? I chose this in order to learn some kind of lesson? It's true, honey, said a new voice that Susan recognized as her mother. It's exactly as Harley says. Dad and I have been here with Dan ever since we both died. You too? Cried Susan. Don't tell me you're part of this as well. We were, answered her father's voice. We were all in this together, and we've done it many times before too. Oh, and what was I supposed to get out of murdering Dan and spending the rest of my life in prison? Susan responded. What lesson was I supposed to learn? Susan, you are not ready to have that revealed to you yet. Wow, that's kind of powerful, said Harley lovingly. That will become clear when you get to the other side and complete your life review. You and I will meet again to go through that process. Everything will be revealed then. What's the point of all this then? Asked Susan. Dan, Mom, Dad, why have you all come here on this day of all days? We came to let you know that in reality you did not make a mistake, her father explained. When you look at it from this side, it becomes clear that neither you nor anyone else has ever done anything wrong. Are you telling me that I am not really guilty of murder? Asked Susan. Susan, it is not that you are not guilty in human terms, Harley explained. Of course you are. You killed your husband, so you are guilty of the crime of murder. Whatever happens in the world of humanity is governed by human law, at least on the surface. So the fact is that you committed a murder and you are paying the price. In the spirit world, you can't actually kill anyone. All souls, we are immortal. When we die, we simply shift to a different vibration and continue to exist on a different plane. So on one level, you killed Dan, but on another level, you didn't. You just enabled him to release his body at the time previously agreed upon. But what about the children? Susan replied. Why did they have to suffer because of what I did? Their souls chose it too, Susan, Dan interjected. They are part of our soul group as well. In fact, they are both very old souls with a great deal of wisdom, so their input during the planning sessions were invaluable. They have chosen to experience a lot in this lifetime around compassion and forgiveness. In fact, their first real test begins tomorrow when they watch you die. I'm sorry, y'all. I know this is ASMR, but I'm actually, reading this. This is a very interesting part of the book. They hate me, though, said Susan sadly. Yes, and they will continue to do so for a long while, Harley responded. Susan began to feel an overwhelming sense of guilt for having devastated her kids' lives. Harley picked up on her thoughts and feelings immediately. Don't go there, Susan, he said. No need for any more guilt. The kids are doing their journey just fine, according to their own plans. You've experienced all the guilt you needed to. So now is the time to acknowledge and appreciate your soul's willingness to take on such a difficult lesson. Susan felt tears streaming down her cheeks. She hadn't cried for years, but lots of wonderful emotions were welling up inside her. She was overcome by a feeling of deep love for herself and a sense of profound self-acceptance for all that she was and had been as a human being. All the guilt and pain drained away. Even the execution seemed less daunting. She would go through it with grace and humility. Suddenly, the light was no more, and for the first time since she had fallen asleep, she opened her eyes. Nothing, just the cell walls and her few belongings. Had it all been just a dream? Had she imagined it all simply as a way to psychologically prepare for the execution? It didn't take very long for her to realize that no dream or trick of the mind could have transformed her consciousness to this degree. The feelings of self-love and self-acceptance she was experiencing were beyond anything she had ever known, and she recognized it as pure grace. She knew she had experienced true forgiveness, radical forgiveness. Susan awoke the Susan awoke the next morning, roused by the guards. They couldn't help but notice that something was different about her. She seemed strangely altered in some way. She seemed at peace. The only explanation they had was that perhaps she had found God at the last minute. The execution was scheduled for 6 p.m. Shortly before that time, 4 people from Dan's family were led into their viewing room. They included Dan's brother and 2 sisters and one of their spouses. On the other side of the wall in their own room sat Susan's children, Chris and Jay, and her brother Bob. Although separated by a wall, the 2 groups could see the window and had a clear view of what was happening on the other side. Susan was already there, strapped to a gurney. The chaplain was there with her and would remain throughout the procedure. "Finally," said one of the sisters, "we get to see justice done. I'm glad I'm here to see her die. I've been waiting a long time for this." Susan looked out through the window at those gathered, first at her sons and her brother. She looked the 2 boys fully in the eyes and through the glass mouthed, "I love you. She simply smiled the smile of a mother. There was no agenda attached to it, just love. She smiled at Bob and mouthed the same thing. As the first round of drugs was administered, Susan's eyes closed for the last time. The rooms were silent. No one spoke. No one moved. The execution took approximately 8 minutes. Once she was pronounced dead, both families were led out and escorted to their respective prearranged press conferences. Microphones and cameras were set up, and reporters were seated at tables. As usual, eager reporters asked the victims' family members how they were feeling now that justice had been served and a dangerous killer had been removed from decent society. Were they able to get closure now and feel able to get on with their lives? The reporters demanded. Strangely enough, as much as the reporters tried to get them to talk like victims and paint Susan as the villain, the family seemed not to want to take the bait. In fact, they found themselves strangely reticent to talk at all, even though Dan's sisters had intended to release a whole load of venom about Susan at the earliest opportunity. To their own consternation, they seemed unable to find the words to express the feelings they did have, primarily because they themselves didn't know exactly what they were feeling. In fact, they had seen something in Susan's eyes as she looked out through that window just before she closed her eyes for the last time. It seemed as though she was communicating something. Everyone had felt it. No one knew what it was, and not one person mentioned it. After the press conferences, they went through their debriefings, and then everyone went their separate ways, back to their day-to-day lives. But there was not one of them who did not feel that they had been forever changed by the experience, and not one of them knew why. I would not be at all surprised if you are in shock at reading this story. After all, it is the kind of story that would make some of what you see on Dateline seem quite tame. And had they run it, they would certainly have painted Susan as heartless, wicked, and most likely beyond redemption. However, I confess that I wrote this story with the full intention to make Susan's crime extreme, in order to make the point that no matter how bad the crime seems, the principle holds that at the spiritual level, there was no crime committed. What needs to be understood is that with radical forgiveness and radical self-forgiveness, there can be no exceptions. They either apply to everything or nothing. There are no half measures. The extent to which you want to make a distinction according to how serious the crime was indicates how little you understand the underlying principles of this form of forgiveness, self or otherwise. If you cannot identify with Susan and see that at the spiritual level she did exactly what she needed to be done for everyone involved, then you don't yet understand radical forgiveness. According to the radical Self-forgiveness philosophy. Even though Susan as a human being was guilty of a terrible murder, at the spiritual level, she was no more than a perpetrator of a crime than her murdered husband was a victim of one. The point of the story is to illustrate the difference and to drive home the true nature of the refrain. It is designed to prevent people from avoiding a truly spiritual interpretation of what happened by simply sugarcoating the situation. Such and such happened, but I got this from it. That is not a reframe. As the story is written, there is no way to sugarcoat what Susan did in human terms. Nothing less than a full spiritual reframe, as described in this book, could make some sense of the situation and represent the key to real self-forgiveness. In the next chapter, I describe a potent radical self-forgiveness practice that Susan might have used to forgive herself had Harley not appeared. It will help us to see how we might forgive ourselves in the same way. It is called the 3 letters process. Chapter 6. The 3 letters process.